Bank staff snickered at Maid's daughter. One account screen silenced the room. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It's a tale that will leave you stunned and questioning your own judgments. In a bank filled with polished marble floors, gold accents, and sleek modern furniture, a place that oozed luxury, the usual hum of business was about to be interrupted in the most unexpected way. The staff, dressed in their crisp uniforms, moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine as they handled the steady stream of customers who walked through the doors. Everything seemed in order until she arrived. A young girl, no more than 14, with messy brown hair and a plain dress, walked through the bank's glass doors. Her shoes were scuffed, her clothes faded from many washes, and she carried a small, worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked out of place among the well-dressed customers and the polished professionals who worked behind the counters. As she approached the front desk, the bank staff couldn't help but exchange glances and stifle quiet snickers. They assumed she was another lost child, perhaps looking for someone. She walked with a quiet determination, her eyes scanning the counter as she approached the teller. The staff behind the counter exchanged amused looks. "Can I help you, sweetie?" one of the tellers asked, her voice dripping with condescension. The girl hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I would like to open a bank account, please," she said in a soft but clear voice. The teller raised an eyebrow, her smile never fading. "Are you sure, honey? Do you have an account number or a deposit?" she asked, as if the child couldn't possibly know what a bank account even was. The girl nodded again, her expression calm and focused. "Yes, I have my ID and some money to deposit," she said. A murmur went through the staff. This was a joke to them. One of them even snickered under their breath. They couldn't fathom how this girl, dressed so plainly, could be there with the intention of opening an account. They were all waiting for the moment when she would either leave in embarrassment or be escorted out by security. But this was not that kind of story. This girl, whose name was Lily, wasn't just any ordinary child. She had come prepared. As the teller began typing into the system, Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out a small folder. Inside, there were papers, official-looking documents. The staff exchanged puzzled looks as they realized Lily wasn't joking. She wasn't some lost child at the bank. She was there for business. As the teller entered Lily's information into the system, the computer screen blinked for a moment. Then, the screen froze. The bank system began to process the information slowly, but when it finally loaded, the staff looked over the screen and went silent. What they saw was unbelievable. On the account screen was a balance so high, it left them all speechless. A balance that even their wealthiest clients rarely saw. Lily's account had more money than most of the people working at that very bank. The snickers turned to silence as the room suddenly felt smaller, the atmosphere heavier. No one knew what to say. The manager, who had been watching from his office, hurried over, his expression a mix of confusion and awe. He stood behind the teller's counter, looking at the screen in disbelief. Is this correct?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily simply nodded. She didn't need to explain further. She had the money, and that was all that mattered. The bank staff, who had laughed at her moments ago, now stood frozen, unsure of how to handle the situation. They had underestimated this girl, and now they were witnessing her quiet power. Lily didn't need to say anything more. She had proven that her presence in that bank wasn't a mistake. The room was silent, and no one dared speak. The only sound was the hum of the bank's air conditioning. The teller who had mocked her earlier quickly cleared her throat and forced a smile, but it was too late. The damage was done. The room would never forget the lesson it had just learned. The next time someone walked into that bank, looking like they didn't belong, no one would dare assume they didn't belong. Ivy stood there, her heart pounding, as the tension in the room lingered like a thick fog. The silence was deafening. The bank manager, a middle-aged man who had been overseeing the situation, was still staring at the computer screen, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. The other staff members had gone completely quiet, no more whispers or snickers. Instead, they stood frozen, their eyes glued to the screen in disbelief. Ivy, the maid's daughter, had walked into this bank hoping to open an account, but what she had just revealed was far beyond anyone's expectations. Her account balance was enough to make even the wealthiest clients at the bank blink in surprise. As Ivy stood there, the weight of the moment sank in. She had come here for a reason that now seemed so much larger than what anyone had imagined. The manager finally blinked, his eyes darting from the screen to Ivy, and then back to the computer. His voice, once sharp and commanding, was now hushed. "Where did this money come from?" he asked softly, as if questioning the very legitimacy of the situation. Ivy didn't hesitate. "My family worked for it," she replied, her voice steady, yet carrying a quiet strength. "My mother has been saving every penny she could for years. We've been living in a small apartment, but this money is the result of hard work and sacrifice." The bank manager, still in a state of shock, nodded slowly, unsure of what to say next. He motioned for the other staff to gather around. "Let's verify the details," he said, trying to regain his composure. As the manager and staff scrambled to verify the account, Ivy remained calm. She had nothing to prove, nothing to defend. The truth had already been laid out before them. In that moment, Ivy felt a sense of liberation. She had never expected her life to be anything other than modest. But today, standing in this grand bank surrounded by the very people who had once snickered at her, she realized something. She was no longer invisible. She had a voice now, one that could not be ignored. The staff continued to work diligently, though their unease was palpable. The once dismissive teller who had mocked Ivy earlier walked over to her, her head bowed slightly in what appeared to be an apology. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't know. I misjudged you." Ivy gave a small, polite nod. She wasn't interested in making anyone feel guilty. The situation had already proven her point. The room fell into another round of awkward silence. But this time it was different. The power dynamic had shifted. The people who had once thought of Ivy as nothing more than a maid's daughter now saw her for what she truly was, a young woman with a future ahead of her. The staff now realized their mistake. No longer would they make assumptions about someone's worth based on their appearance or background. The next time a person walked into that bank, no matter their attire or status, they would be treated with the same respect as anyone else. Ivy looked around the room one last time, meeting the eyes of each staff member. There was no need for words. They knew, as did she, that something had changed. As she walked out of the bank, her steps were lighter. She had done what she came to do, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been underestimated. In a world where appearances often spoke louder than actions, Ivy had shown that true value couldn't be measured by the clothes on your back or the amount of money you had in the bank. True value was found in hard work, perseverance, and the courage to stand up when it mattered most. Ivy walked out of the bank, the cool breeze outside offering a stark contrast to the suffocating tension she had just left behind. Her steps were steady, but her heart raced. She had come to this place expecting nothing more than a simple transaction, but what had just happened inside changed everything. As she stood on the steps of the bank, looking up at the towering skyscrapers around her, she couldn't help but feel a sense of liberation. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. The world had seen her for who she truly was, and in that moment, she realized the power of standing up for herself. Back at the bank, the manager and the staff were still processing the events that had just unfolded. They were left stunned, shaken by the realization of how wrong they had been. As they continued to verify Ivy's account, the atmosphere had shifted. The mocking smiles were gone, replaced by genuine confusion and regret. No one had expected this. The once dismissive teller, who had laughed at Ivy earlier, now stood by the manager's side, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I didn't know," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. The manager nodded, still in disbelief. "None of us did," he replied. He turned to the other staff members, his voice firm but measured. "We've all learned something today. We can't judge people based on their appearance or their background. We need to treat everyone with the same respect, no matter who they are or where they come from." The staff stood silently, absorbing the lesson. Ivy had taught them a valuable one they would never forget. Meanwhile, Ivy had begun walking down the street, her thoughts swirling. She wasn't just thinking about the money or the way the staff had treated her. She was thinking about the people who had worked hard their entire lives, people who were often overlooked and underestimated. People like her mother, who had dedicated years to providing for Ivy, always putting others before herself. Ivy's mother was the real hero in this story, and Ivy knew she owed everything to her. She had spent years watching her mother clean houses, cook meals, and do everything in her power to make sure Ivy had a better life. Yet, despite all her hard work, her mother was still treated as if she didn't matter. But Ivy wasn't going to let that happen anymore. She wasn't going to let anyone ignore the sacrifices her mother had made. She wasn't going to let anyone look down on her or her family ever again. Ivy's thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling her name. She turned around and saw a figure walking toward her. It was the bank manager, and he looked different now. Softer, less imposing. He stopped in front of her, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry," he said, his voice sincere. "What happened today, it was wrong. We judged you based on things we shouldn't have, and I'm truly sorry for that. I hope you'll give us a chance to make it right." Ivy looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she considered his words. But then she remembered why she had come here in the first place, to prove that she was more than just a maid's daughter, to prove that she deserved respect, just like anyone else. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. "You don't need to apologize," she said quietly. "You've already learned the lesson. That's enough for me." With that, she turned and continued walking, the weight of her own journey lifting with every step she took. As she walked away from the bank, Ivy felt a sense of closure. She had done what she set out to do. She had shown the world that no one, not even the most powerful people in the room, could dismiss her because of her background. She had earned her place, and she was ready to move forward. And while she would never forget the way the bank staff had treated her, she knew that today had been a turning point, not just for her, but for them as well. Ivy's footsteps echoed softly as she walked down the street, her thoughts still swirling in her mind. The sun had begun to set, casting a golden glow across the city. It felt as if the world was changing with each passing minute, as if everything she had known up until now was shifting, slowly but surely. The events at the bank had unfolded in a way she hadn't expected, but as she walked further, she realized that this was only the beginning of her journey. The bank manager's apology had been sincere, but Ivy wasn't sure that was enough. She had spent so much of her life being invisible, her worth reduced to the tasks she performed for others. But now, she had a voice. She had a presence. And it was time for the world to know who she really was. Ivy reached her small apartment building, the place she had always called home. She walked up the steps, her hands gripping the railing as she ascended to the second floor. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was where she and her mother had lived for as long as Ivy could remember. Her mother, who had worked tirelessly to provide for them, never once complaining about the hard work or the exhaustion. Ivy knew that her mother had always dreamed of something more for her. She wanted Ivy to have opportunities she never had, a life that was better than their current reality. As Ivy stepped into their apartment, she found her mother sitting at the small kitchen table, her head down as she sorted through bills. The apartment was simple, but it had a warmth to it that made it feel like home. The smell of her mother's cooking lingered in the air, a comforting reminder of everything they had been through together. Ivy walked over to the table and sat down across from her. Her mother looked up, her tired eyes lighting up when she saw her daughter. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. Ivy smiled, the weight of the day still fresh in her mind. "It went better than I expected," she said. "I think they finally saw me for who I am." Her mother nodded, her face breaking into a proud smile. "I knew you had it in you," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze Ivy's hand. Ivy looked at her mother, feeling a surge of gratitude. She had always admired her mother's strength, her ability to make the best of their situation. But now, Ivy realized, it was her turn to step up. It was time for her to prove that she could make something of herself, that she was more than just the daughter of a maid. As the days went by, Ivy's confidence grew. She continued to visit the bank, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. Each time she walked through those doors, she felt the eyes of the staff on her. But this time, it wasn't because they were mocking her. It was because they recognized her. They saw her for who she was, a young woman with ambition, determination, and a future ahead of her. One day, as Ivy entered the bank for her regular visit, she was greeted with a surprising warmth. The teller who had once dismissed her now smiled as she approached. "How are you today?" she asked, her voice genuine. Ivy returned the smile, feeling the shift in the air. "I'm doing well," she replied. "Thank you for asking." The manager, who had once been so cold and dismissive, now gave her a respectful nod. Ivy couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had changed their perception of her, and in doing so, she had changed the way they viewed everyone who walked through those doors. Ivy had proven that anyone, no matter their background or appearance, deserved to be treated with respect. The lesson had been learned, not just by her, but by everyone around her. As Ivy left the bank that day, she felt a sense of fulfillment. She had made her mark. She had stood up for herself, for her family, and for everyone who had ever been judged unfairly. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she was ready. She was ready to take on whatever came next, knowing that she had the strength to face it. She had already proven that she could overcome anything, and she would continue to do so, one step at a time. Ivy sat by the window of her small apartment, gazing out at the city lights. The night was calm, but her mind was racing. The events of the past few weeks felt surreal. She had come from nothing but a life of hard work, humility, and invisible sacrifice. Yet here she was, standing taller than she ever had before. The transformation wasn't just in how the bank staff now treated her, or how people looked at her when she entered a room. It was in the way she saw herself. She had fought for her place, and she had earned it. But as the nights passed and the quiet settled over the apartment, Ivy began to feel a new wave of uncertainty. What came next? She knew the world had changed for her, but what about the future? Her mind turned back to her mother, who had always put her own dreams aside to give Ivy a chance at something better. The woman had sacrificed so much, and Ivy knew she had to do the same. Not just for herself, but for her mother, too. Ivy had grown up hearing her mother's stories of missed opportunities, of dreams left unfulfilled. Her mother had always wanted a better life, but the reality of their circumstances had always stood in the way. Ivy knew that she wasn't going to let that happen to her. She couldn't let it happen. The following days passed in a blur as Ivy focused on her studies, determined to make the most of the opportunities now within reach. She had always been a smart and capable student, but now she had the drive to back it up. Her grades improved, and she found herself applying for internships that, just a year ago, she would never have considered. Ivy was no longer afraid to aim high, but even with all the changes in her life, there were still challenges to face. She was still a young woman in a world that often valued appearances more than substance. She still had to prove that she belonged, that she was worthy of the respect she had earned. It wasn't easy. She faced setbacks, moments of doubt, and the occasional harsh word from people who couldn't see past her background. But Ivy kept going. She knew that every challenge was just another opportunity to show the world what she was capable of. One day, as Ivy walked to her internship at a local nonprofit, she bumped into a familiar face. It was the bank manager, the man who had once dismissed her, now with a look of genuine respect in his eyes. He stopped her on the sidewalk. "Ivy, I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "What you've done, how you've handled everything, it's impressive. You've proven that your future is in your hands." Ivy smiled, surprised by the kindness in his words. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot to me." The encounter was brief, but it stuck with her. She realized that the respect she had earned wasn't just from the bank staff or from those who had underestimated her. It was from herself, too. She had proven that she could rise above the circumstances of her birth, and that meant everything. As Ivy moved forward with her life, she began to see the world in a new light. She had always been taught to stay quiet, to be invisible, to accept the role society had given her. But now, she knew that she could change the narrative. She could be the author of her own story. Ivy's confidence continued to grow, and with each new opportunity, she took a step closer to her dream. A dream she once thought was out of reach, but now seemed more possible than ever. She would never forget where she came from, but she knew that her future was hers to shape. And with every challenge she overcame, she proved that anyone, no matter their background or circumstances, could rise to greatness. Ivy had come a long way since that fateful day at the bank, but the road ahead was still uncertain. As weeks turned into months, The initial excitement of her transformation began to settle into a quiet determination. She was still the same person, but with a newfound sense of confidence and a clear vision for her future. She had applied for several internships in the hopes of gaining experience and expanding her horizons. She found herself in a new world now, one where she was no longer an outsider, but someone who was starting to be recognized for her abilities. However, with success came challenges. Ivy had always been diligent and hardworking, but her success didn't come without its share of hurdles. She still faced people who couldn't get past her background. There were whispers at work, subtle comments, and sideways glances that suggested she didn't belong. But Ivy had learned something powerful in the last few months. She had learned how to walk with her head held high, even when others tried to bring her down. She knew that no matter what they said, no matter how much they tried to undermine her, she was worthy of being where she was. One day, she was walking back from the nonprofit office when she was greeted by a familiar voice. It was the bank manager. She hadn't seen him in a while, but he was there, standing by the sidewalk, waiting for her. She hadn't expected to see him again, especially not after everything that had happened. But when their eyes met, she saw something different in his gaze, something sincere, a kind of respect she hadn't expected. "Ivy, I just wanted to say," he began, his voice softer than before. "I've been thinking a lot about what you did. I know I didn't treat you well at first, but watching how you've handled everything, it's changed the way I see things." Ivy looked at him, not with bitterness, but with a calm understanding. She had long forgiven him. She knew that his actions had been a reflection of his own limitations, not hers. "Thank you," she said simply. "I've learned a lot too, from everyone, from everything." The manager nodded, his eyes sincere. "You've set an example, Ivy. Not just for me, but for all of us. You've shown us that it's not about where we come from, but what we're capable of." Ivy felt a swell of pride in her chest. She had proven that she was more than just her background, more than just the label society had placed on her. She was capable of achieving greatness, just like anyone else. After their conversation, Ivy felt lighter. The weight of doubt that had sometimes crept into her heart over the past few months began to lift. She knew now that the world had already seen her for what she was. It was time for her to take the next step forward. As Ivy sat at her desk that evening, reflecting on how far she had come, she realized that her journey was just beginning. There would be obstacles ahead, and not everyone would embrace her success. But Ivy wasn't afraid. She had earned every moment of this victory. And the best part was that this was only the beginning of what she could achieve. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that she was capable of facing any challenge with the same determination and strength that had brought her this far. She smiled to herself, feeling the full weight of her progress. She had become the person she was meant to be, and there was no turning back now. Ivy stood at the entrance of the prestigious nonprofit organization where she had been working for several months. The doors, once intimidating and out of reach, now felt like an opportunity waiting to be seized. Her journey had taken so many unexpected turns, starting with that pivotal moment at the bank, and now here she was, a young woman on the verge of achieving what she had once thought was impossible. She had risen above the whispers and the stares, the doubts of others, and now she was standing on the precipice of something greater. But as much as she had accomplished, there was still one thing that lingered in her mind. Her mother. Ivy's mother had been the driving force behind everything Ivy had achieved. She had worked tirelessly, never asking for anything in return, always putting her family first. Ivy knew her mother had dreamed of a better life for her, but she had never allowed herself the luxury of thinking beyond survival. Now, Ivy was determined to give her mother that life. She had to make sure that everything her mother had sacrificed would not be in vain. The realization hit Ivy one afternoon when she sat at her desk, reviewing her latest project proposal. It was the first time in her life that she had something to offer, something valuable to contribute. She had always felt like an outsider, always trying to fit into a world that didn't quite accept her. But now, she realized that she didn't need to fit in. She could create her own space, her own future. She had the power to shape her own path. As she was lost in thought, her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from her mother. Ivy smiled as she read the simple words, "How's my girl doing? I hope you're making the world better, one step at a time." Ivy's heart swelled with emotion. Her mother had always believed in her, even when Ivy hadn't believed in herself. She had been the quiet strength in Ivy's life, the one who had always reminded her that no matter how hard things got, there was always a way forward. Ivy typed a quick response, telling her mother about the latest progress at work and the new opportunities that were opening up for her. But deep down, Ivy knew this wasn't just about her. It was about the both of them. It was about proving to her mother that their sacrifices hadn't been for nothing. Ivy had already proven to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined, but now she wanted to prove it to the world. She was ready to take the next big step, and that meant making a real impact. One that would change not only her life but the lives of others as well. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. A meeting was scheduled with some of the top leaders in the nonprofit sector, and Ivy had the chance to pitch an idea that could revolutionize how resources were distributed to underserved communities. It was the kind of opportunity she had always dreamed of, the kind of chance that could elevate her from a young woman trying to find her way into someone who could truly make a difference. When the day of the meeting arrived, Ivy stood in front of the boardroom with a calm that surprised her. She had prepared for this moment for so long, and now it was time to put everything into action. As she began speaking, sharing her vision, she could feel the weight of her journey behind every word. She wasn't just presenting an idea. She was presenting herself, the person who had fought to get to this point, the person who had persevered through every setback. By the end of the meeting, the room was quiet. Ivy had captivated them. She had shown them that she wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was someone who had a vision, someone who understood the struggles of the people she was trying to help. And just like that, Ivy's world changed again. The board members not only agreed to support her idea, but they also offered her a leadership role to oversee the project. It was a huge step, and Ivy could hardly believe it. But as she left the meeting that day, her phone buzzed again. It was another message from her mother. "I knew you could do it," it read. "You've always had it in you." Ivy smiled, her heart full. She had done it. She had proven to herself, to the world, and to her mother that anything was possible. And this was only the beginning. Ivy walked out of the boardroom that day, her heart pounding with excitement. The proposal she had pitched had been met with overwhelming support, and now she found herself at the helm of a project that could change the lives of thousands of people. It was the breakthrough she had been waiting for, the culmination of years of hard work and self-doubt. But as she stood outside the building, the wind brushing against her face, a strange feeling washed over her. It wasn't fear or uncertainty, but a realization that she was standing on the edge of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. The journey had been long and difficult, but it was far from over. Ivy had spent years trying to prove herself, to show the world that she was more than just a maid's daughter, more than just a face in the crowd. She had fought for every opportunity, and now, she had the chance to make a real difference. But with that opportunity came a new set of challenges. She knew that not everyone would be supportive of her success. There would always be people who doubted her, who looked at her and saw only her past, her background. Ivy had always known that the world could be a harsh place, but now she realized that the real challenge wasn't just overcoming those who underestimated her. It was about maintaining her own sense of self-worth in a world that often tried to strip that away. As she walked to her car, she received a message from her mother. Ivy smiled as she read the words, "I'm so proud of you, my girl. You've always had a special spark." Her mother had been the constant in her life, the one person who had always believed in her, even when she hadn't believed in herself. And now, Ivy was determined to make her mother proud. She was determined to build the future her mother had always dreamed of, not just for herself, but for both of them. The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and sleepless nights. Ivy threw herself into the project, determined to make it a success. She worked long hours, often staying at the office late into the night, reviewing plans, meeting with partners, and refining the details of her vision. But as much as she worked, she made sure to stay grounded. She never lost sight of where she had come from, or of the people she was doing this for. Each time she looked at the faces of the people she was helping, she was reminded of her own struggle. They weren't just statistics or data points. They were real people, with real hopes and dreams, just like her. Ivy knew that this project had the potential to change lives, but she also knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, obstacles, and people who tried to stand in her way. But Ivy was no stranger to hardship. She had fought for every opportunity, and now, she would fight for those who needed her help the most. As she stood in front of the project's first community center, watching the first group of people walk through the doors, Ivy couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. She had done it. She had created something that would leave a lasting impact. She had proven to herself, and to the world, that no matter where you come from, you can achieve greatness. But more than that, she had shown others that they, too, could overcome their circumstances and create their own path. As Ivy watched the people walk through the doors, smiling and laughing, she knew that this was only the beginning. There was still so much to be done, so much more to achieve. But for the first time in her life, Ivy felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. She was no longer a maid's daughter. She was a leader, a change maker, and most importantly, someone who had proven that anything was possible. Ivy stood at the front of the community center, watching the people gather. The small space was filled with the hum of conversation and laughter, a stark contrast to the silence that once dominated her life. The walls, adorned with photographs of people she had never met but now considered part of her journey, told a story of struggle, perseverance, and triumph. The center was bustling with energy, the beginning of something bigger than she had ever imagined. She had seen this moment coming for so long, but standing here now, seeing it all come together, felt surreal. She had spent countless hours planning, organizing, and pushing through obstacles. Now, as the doors opened to welcome the community, Ivy realized just how far she had come. Not just in her career or her professional achievements, but in the person she had become. She had proven to herself that nothing was impossible, no matter where she started. Ivy's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to read the message. It was from her mother, as it always was. "I'm so proud of you, my girl. You've done more than I ever hoped for. I always knew you could do it." Ivy smiled, her heart full. Her mother had always believed in her, even when Ivy hadn't believed in herself. It was a quiet kind of belief, a belief that had driven Ivy to do everything she had done up until this point. Ivy had always thought that her success would be about proving something to the world, but now she realized it was about proving something to herself. It was about showing the world that no one should be underestimated, no matter their background or where they came from. As Ivy walked through the center, speaking with the volunteers and greeting the families who had come for the opening, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what it was all for. Not the recognition, not the accolades, but the difference she was making. For the first time, Ivy didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged, like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The road had been long and filled with challenges, but she had persevered. She had fought for every opportunity and every chance to prove her worth. And now, standing in front of this center, Ivy realized that her journey had just begun. She wasn't done yet. There was so much more she could accomplish, so much more she wanted to do. She wanted to create more spaces like this, to reach more people, to continue making a difference. The world had a way of making people feel small, but Ivy had learned to rise above it. She had learned that her worth wasn't determined by anyone else's standards. It was determined by her own actions, her own belief in herself. As the evening came to a close, Ivy stood outside the community center, watching as people left with smiles on their faces. She felt a sense of pride, not because of the success of the day, but because of what the success meant. It was proof that no matter where you start, no matter the obstacles, you can create a future that is yours to shape. Ivy had changed her own story, and in doing so, she had started to change the stories of others. This was just the beginning, and Ivy was ready for whatever came next.